Okay.
It seems live.
All right, we are live. Okay, so the first thing it wants us to do is to briefly talk about our physical or cognitive domain intervention assignment. So each of us are supposed to address sort of what we learned from that and to understand kind of more just what we took away from the thing. Because I know that when we do the research, we didn't have a whole lot of time to sort of sit and talk to each other about what we did. So what were some main things that you took away from the assignment itself? Does anybody want to start?
Hey, my notes froze. Let me try and see if I can get back to it. I'm stuck in one section that is not that portion.
Okay, well, while Marty's looking for her notes, I guess I can start. Something that really struck me was, first of all, the fact that there was so much information out there about childhood obesity. And I think that's kind of sad that this problem strikes us so much with like the youngest generation, because it's something that it's not just the responsibility of the kids, it's the responsibility of the parents and the people around those kids that are helping them to grow. And the fact that there's such a problem with obesity in like 5, 6, 7-year-old kids is ridiculous. But something that I really liked is something that we try to do in my house to be healthy, which is just making really small changes in order to help us to be better off. Like some of the ones that I saw when I was doing research were things like eating off of smaller plates or eating out of smaller bowls, or different things. Like there are different mental tricks you can use, and like I use those. Like I base the size of my plate off of how hungry I feel. So if I'm a little hungry, then I get the little tiny sandwich plates, or if I'm sort of hungry, I get a bigger plate or whatever. And that seems to help me from overeating, because I prejudge how hungry I am and then I put the amount of food on it that I think is going to fit on the plate. And that seems to keep me from overeating. Um, Also, I think it's just a discipline thing as you work on just recognizing when you're giving into like a craving versus like something that your body actually needs. Then you can just grow, and it's really helpful. And the little things like not drinking soda or drinking water instead of juice, like we don't realize what a big difference that makes until we do it. But I know from within my family, we've tried that. Some of us have tried that where we've completely given up like soda or something in exchange for water, and it's definitely helped.
That's something that we do in our family. I'll have a soda here and there. I'll have a couple sips of like my dad's Coke while we're at a barbecue or something, but I can't stand more than 1 or 2 sips now, because it's been several years since I've really had soda. It's been about 7 years. And it makes me sick now. Even just the 2 little sips, I'm like, okay, it's too sweet, and I feel really, really sick after I have it. And that's water's just the go-to here, and so that's what my kids are used to, and so that's their go-to too. Anytime we are out somewhere, they always ask if they can have pop, but it's just not something we ever even have around the house. So it's not an issue. We don't buy pop, we don't do juice, we don't do any of those things. So I think it's easier to set an example when the kids are little so that it's just normal for them. And when they're thirsty, they want water because that's what they always have. And I think it's the same thing with setting those habits. And we didn't have very good nutritional habits when I was growing up. My parents just kind of fed us whatever, and there was always junk food around. And so I always have a salad with dinner for my kids, and snacks are sliced red peppers and green peppers or cucumbers or something like that. And my kids love those things. And so I'm hoping as they grow up, that's just the norm for them, so that when they think, oh, I'm hungry, instead of going to get a bag of potato chips or something like that, they're just used to it, and so they go and grab some vegetables. So that's one thing I liked about the information, is it talked about doing it as a family. And I feel that by making this just a way of life for our family, that they'll grow up thinking that's how it is. That's what you eat.
I think that also goes under kind of what I, because I to make small behavioral changes, and I do what you do. Is if I'm not as hungry, I get a smaller plate. Kind of like a brain game for me. But um, yeah, my mom did the exact same thing that you're doing. So all I have with me, I carry around this huge water bottle that I have with me all day. And kind of just like the snacks that we were given and the snacks that when I moved out and I was living alone, it wasn't hard to start cooking for myself, but I was like, oh, I have more options. But I was so used to healthy at home that's what I did, and I said that was a blessing, and I want, kind of like you did, I want to pass it on to my children as well.
I'm glad to hear that that worked. Hopefully it'll work with my kids too then.
Uh-oh.
Oh, Caitlin, I think you're muted.
Yeah, I can hear you. No.
We can't hear you.
I had the same problem earlier. Maybe if you exit out and then come back into the meeting, it'll work. That's what I had to do.
We will wait for you.
Jimmy B's inspirational message on my phone, constant source of encouragement and inspiration. And so I got my bedside in the hospital and I can listen to it anytime I want. So my talk to the Lano family, it's an honor. It means a great deal to me. So thanks very much. I also like to thank my good family for
No, nothing.
In the darkest of moments, tears running down our cheeks, we embrace and we pray. Please, don't leave me. We can fight this together. There's no fear in love, and your love is my strength.
There's the notes portion. You could always, I guess, pull up the notes and write your responses. I hate that because we don't know what else to do.
In the chat.
What if you called us on the regular hangouts or less than for fun? She called, so we could still hear her. Or we just would.
Yeah, we could do that.
We could try that, but she's gone now. So let me see if. Oh well, I'm using headphones, so that wouldn't work on my computer.
Oh, that's right.
She comes back, I can just give her my cell phone and she can call it and I can put her on speaker.
Yeah, that could work too. Hopefully she comes back.
Maybe she's rebooting.
Maybe. Hold on, I gotta take care of my cat. I got it, Mom. Mom. Sit. Gotta sit. Just know if I start saying things about behave and sit, it's to the cat, not to you guys.
I wish we could pause the broadcast.
I know.
As they disappear to the tunnel, emerge to see on the other side.
Should we start shooting the points?
I mean, I
What
guess
we're
we can
supposed to
keep
talk about?
going, but each of us are supposed to discuss each of them. I guess when she comes back, we can
Oh,
let
she's
her
here.
go back. Oh, maybe she's back.
I listen to the sounds of the circus, of the kids laughing, and of the train chugging along. Now I don't know why I took train. Perhaps my life. Maybe
Dirt in your eyes.
Still can't hear you. If you want, I can give you my cell phone number, and you can call and put you on speaker. Do that. Okay. Okay, so chat's disabled. I'll just tell you it's 801-808-8823. There we go. Okay, I've got it up now.
when doctors tell you you have 3 weeks to live, you try to live a lifetime of moments and dreams. But you say, I only 3 weeks. When doctors tell you that you only hold a smile 40 straight days of intensive therapy, 24 hours a day, you sit there and count almost 336 hours, or you see each day as a blessing. Time is something that cannot be bought. God, and it is not in endless supply. Time is simply
Okay, you there?
you live your life.
There we go.
Okay, can you guys hear her?
Kind of.
It's just echoes.
Yeah, there's just like feedback.
Hmm. There's some weird. Okay. I'm getting a weird like whistle.
Yeah, me too. Is chat working?
It didn't at first, and then I was able to get it to pull up after that, like the second time I tried it.
Okay, Caitlin, do you want to try sending like what you learned from the project we did last week about the physical domain via chat, and then I guess we can just read it off for the purpose of the live broadcast? Okay. All right, so Caitlin says to go ahead and move on while she switches computers. So the next one is to describe the social or emotional domain intervention that we researched this week. So state whether you've actually implemented the intervention personally to address the identified problem. If so, discuss how effective the intervention was. If not, discuss research or other evidence assessing the effectiveness of the intervention. Does anyone have the desire to go first? You can't go first. Sorry, the cat meowed at me.
No, it's fine. I did neglect. Let me just pull it up. I did neglect, and the first resource that I went to was a peer-reviewed article, and it was actually really neat. It was called "Child Neglect: A Guide for Prevention, Assessment, and Intervention." Um, and so it starts off by saying that um, it's one of the most common types of child treatment, even though it's reported as often and it's not acknowledged or publicized as much as abuse is. But it's still just as prevalent and it can do just as much damage. It's just we don't talk about it as much, and I remember part of people said that even um, doctors will just not acknowledge it as much as they do abuse, and I think that's because with use bruises, scars, and scratches, and neglect is kind of a more silent killer. You don't see signs of very often. So you're really paying attention to the behaviors and home environment. So the official definition on there that they for abuse is absent act failure to act on the part of a parent or caregiver which results in death, serious physical or emotional harm, sexual abuse or exploitation, or an act of failure to act which presents an imminent risk of serious harm. So I had I switched to my laptop right before this, just for this meeting. Let me plug it in really quick. But they had different abuse, or sorry, not abuse, neglect, and they were just mild, moderate, and then severe. And so, based on the three different types of abuse, that determined what of assessments to give and also interventions. Oh, sorry, the beds here are super high. So moderate neglect was just, you can report it to Child Protective Services, but it doesn't always have to be reported if it's something that the child or the parent and the child can do on their own. Moderate neglect is a little bit more intrusive than that. You can have community interventions, family interventions, stuff like that, church that can help. And then severe neglect does require CPS to come in, and they also sometimes have other people come in with them, like just cops. So different signs to look for in the parent to see, like if you kind of sense that the child is being neglected, and if you're around the parent, these are things that you can look for. They appear to be indifferent to their child. They seem either apathetic or depressed. They behave irrationally or in a really bizarre manner. They abuse alcohol or drugs. They deny the existence of or blame the child for the problems in school or in the home. They see their child as all bad, worthless, or like they're a burden. And they look to the child for their primary source of attention and care and satisfaction. So the roles are kind of switched, what the child should be needing from the parent seeks from the child. So not just CPS can get involved. I mentioned the cops can come, and then if it is a more mild one, and you notice it can be hard to approach. And one of my classes, my teacher was saying that you can call CPS and they can kind of help you and guide you on what you can do. Just to involve any kind of community members that you may think could help. But as for prevention and intervention, the service, so it said, services for interventions must be based on principles that empower families, build upon strengths, and respect culture and diversity, which I thought was really cool. So they have steps to do when it comes to interventions. Oh, my laptop's freezing. 1 second. Okay, well, it's not wanting to pull up anymore. But the second intervention that I researched, or that I, not intervention, the second resource that I went out to research was, have you guys ever heard of Dr. Mike Evans? He has videos on YouTube. So he has, the first time I heard of him was in one of my classes, and we were talking about our abuse that day. And I thought it was really neat the way he kind of just laid everything out for you. And this video that I looked at was called Saving Brains. And so he starts off by saying, we literally can save brains. because neglect plays such a huge role in the child's life. And so he says the first 1,000 days are the most important because of the brain's plasticity. So the first 1,000 days of a child's life is when um, the brain prioritizes learning and growth. And they're taking, and when you think about it, they really are the most important. That's when they learn how to walk, how to talk, how to, all that stuff, how to eat, how to sit up. Um, so just, being very careful. So early intervention was always the best thing to do. Um, he mentioned looking into health, nutrition, and play-based response. Sorry, downloading it again. And so he brings up the physical touch. He says when a parent responds quickly to their child, especially when they're younger, they get them used to that and they have that secure attachment. They feel secure, they feel loved, and they feel wanted. But when they're neglected, they have none of that. And then he talked about, I guess, the causes of that, and they were really bad. I mean, the children, like they did a study, they did like this year-long study, for years, I mean, and all the children involved in that who had been, were victims of neglect, they ended up with lots of different kinds of substance abuse. They did, alcohol, drugs, all of that. They didn't do good in school. A lot of them were dropouts. They had 50 plus sexual partners, just horrible things like that. Um, when they're children, like he mentioned, it's hard to see, but it all catches up to them. And then he said, however, when you do give these interventions early, they are able to catch up with their peers. And he mostly did it with play-based responses. And says when they start, even if it's kind of later, they're not as young, not just 2 or 3. As long as they're starting to develop those attachments and they are getting that outside time to play, they caught up with their peers. They checked back with them 17 years later, and they saw that those who were especially engaged in play had caught up, and some had even surpassed them. Okay, here it is. It pulled back up. So the other resource, when it talked about interventions, it said when you go in for an intervention, to have a developmental framework and know, where they're at in the levels, what you have to do with the parent and with the child. Then you have to understand the importance of outreach and community. Then carry out a comprehensive family assessment. And he also the author talked about different strategies. So doing child-centered strategies, parent-centered strategies, family-centered strategies, and they all focus obviously on what they're named after. But the most successful was family-centered strategies. It was just a way for them to. Oh, and they use that the most also with families who are at risk for neglect. So you also have to utilize empowerment-based practice. So like I said in the beginning, it has to have it makes the family feel good about themselves. Emphasize their strengths, develop cultural competence. So if there's something that's culturally getting in the way of that, you kind of have to, you know, accept and not accept, respect the differences, but teach them, it's not right to have this kind of neglect. And then just ensure developmental appropriateness. So that was the interventions that I found. One was, of course, more, I guess, based on what the government does and what CPS does and what they advise us to do. And then the rest, or the other one was just a suggestion on how we can do it if we see it early on and, trying to get them outside, stuff like that.
I've got a question for you that I was thinking of when you mentioned reporting. My understanding was that neglect is a form of abuse, and I know there are certain areas, like in Idaho and Utah, where any adult is required to report what they think might be abuse, even if they don't have any proof to the authorities. Does neglect not fall in that category? Did it mention anything like that?
I'm not sure if it does. The article didn't talk about that. The reason I can tell you what teachers do, but that's the reason I know a little bit more about CPS is because we were trained in one of my classes. to know what to do. So you can't, if you guys ever come, so this is just for teachers, it's for all of you, like all of us. But if you ever come across a child or a student that you see is coming to you with bruises constantly, and they're in the same areas, or they're just really, suspicious, or they say something to you that could be a little fishy. So keep a journal of all of these things, but you can't tell anyone that you keep it, because then once, if there is an investigation, that becomes evidence. So you want to keep that until you know that it would be a good time to bring it out, because then they could turn it and kind of use it against you. The lawyers could, or whoever you're working with. And then, yeah, so you can make a call and say, you don't want to tell anyone else about it, because then you could bring them, and they can say that you're compromising things and making things up. So you want to be as detailed about the child as possible and how they came to you, but they're going to ask you questions, and the way you word things, or the way you phrase your questions to them, or your answers, you have to be very, I guess, careful and articulate, because if you sound like you're coming off as you're trying to frame the parents, and a lot of times that'll happen just because you want to make sure that they get to the bottom of it. But if you sound like that, then they're going to say, well, you're just trying to instigate something. And with anything like that, it'll throw the entire case out. Even if if it's an obvious case of abuse or neglect, they'll throw it out, and they won't be able to investigate it. So I'm not sure. I mean, we talked about neglect when it came to CPS, so I would assume that it would fall under that same category as abuse, but I'm not completely sure.
Thank you. I was curious about that.
All right, moment of truth, Caitlin. How's your microphone?
Can you hear me now?
Yes!
I'm sorry, it said that my microphone was hard drive muted, and I was like, I don't even know what that means.
Ooh.
So I had to restart it, and then yeah. But
No.
so am I the only one left? I'm sorry.
No. Nobody. We haven't really gotten through much. So
okay.
if you want to just sort of, in 2 minutes or less, talk about what you learned from the physical domain intervention we did last week, and then talk about what you learned this week from your own research, then, and that's 4 to 5 minutes, that would be awesome.
Yeah, okay, so last week during the physical domain, I was able to interview a parent, and a lot of things that did come up were the bullying and all that stuff and acting out, and I think that there's a lot of information, and one was, I think, that you guys discussed earlier, was obesity. And that was a really eye-opener to me, because I was like, wow, I didn't really know all these things and what's all that you can do for that. And one thing for obesity, that was a big one that we talked when I talked to a parent. She has a 10-year-old, and she says that he is just really picky and he doesn't like eating things, and she says that his favorite thing right now to eat is just chicken nuggets and French fries, but she's like, that's kind of my fault, because I gave in to him and I would just do it. She's like, but the one thing that she usually does is that they like to go out and do things as a family. They like to go swimming, because I live in Arizona, it's really hot here. So we like to go swimming in the summer, and then she's like, we like to go hiking, and we just do things as a family to make sure that we're staying active and that we're not just being lazy bums and sitting on our, you know what I mean? But there was an equal, they balanced it out, I guess is the right word. And then for this week, I decided to do abuse, but I decided to more focus on emotional abuse. And I found a couple things that were kind of interesting, that it told me on a couple websites that it affects 6 million children in the United States every year. And emotional abuse, I was like, well, what kind of, it affects you emotionally, but what really is it? What does it do? And they said that it's anything from rejecting, isolating, assaulting, terrorizing, neglecting the child, which we've talked about neglect, and then telling, basically anything telling them that they're worthless, anything that's going to affect emotionally in the future. And they said that this usually happens with for children because the parents are in stress, or it's like they say it usually happens in single family households, or social isolation and lack of available resources. And I thought that was interesting because, like sometimes you see like families and you sometimes see like a mom's gonna get mad at her child sometimes, like that's obvious. But like sometimes you see like a child and you're like, oh wow, that's kind of like, I wonder if that's hurtful, or but the intervention, there was a really good quote that I pulled off of one of the resources, and they said that like children may have cognitive disorientations or misunderstandings about what has happened or why it happened because they're blaming themselves for it. And I thought that was interesting as well because they're blaming themselves for the abuse that they're going through, and it's like it's not really anything that they're doing particularly. But the interventions that they mentioned were mostly revolved around parents. They said that if you ever feel like you're in a situation like that or you need help, they said definitely reach out to any family members. You can reach out to teachers, like even church members. And if you feel like you're in a situation where you think you're just going, like when parents think they're just going to act out, then they should just walk away. And they said one thing is don't label your child, like don't call them stupid, don't call them lazy, like don't where it's going to emotionally hurt them in the future. And the one thing that they said is definitely apologize because that is definitely something that's going to help. But they definitely said the one intervention that definitely helps is just reaching out and going to counseling or getting help, even if the child is emotionally abused. Like even for like a teacher, they said if a teacher sees it, like a teacher should reach out to someone and try to help and that kind of thing. But they definitely mentioned like prevention programs and like prevention programs that enhance parenting skills that prevent healthy child development. So I thought those were all really interesting because I never really looked into like emotional abuse before and what it actually does. And the side effects that they talked about were kind of interesting, like how it can lead to a child's aggression and depression and low self-esteem, and that they ultimately will act out in the future. But there's definitely things that like we could do. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
One thing that I like about what you mentioned as far as labeling your children, I think that that's really important, not only for the child, but for yourself. In my practicum class, I worked with a woman who had gotten into the habit of giving those labels to her daughter, and she knew that it wasn't right, and she'd get frustrated and say, "Oh, why are you so annoying?" Um, and even something simple like that was not only a message to her child, reinforced in her own mind that her daughter was annoying or trying to cause trouble. It made her view her child as a troublemaker, even though she was just acting like any little child. And luckily she realized that. She's like, I know I need to stop saying these things because it reinforces in my mind that she really is doing these things. So I think that that is so important to make sure not only for your child that they don't grow up thinking that, but so that you don't cement in those inaccurate views of your kids.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I had a friend growing up. We've been friends for a really long time, and she actually, like, she recently just told me that she was emotionally abused when she was growing up and physically abused, and I like never really knew. And it was interesting because when I was looking this up, there was like signs of like emotional abuse, and I was like, oh, that would make sense, like but you never really pick them out until she reached out to me, and I was like, oh my goodness, but. She has sought help and all that stuff, and she's good. But I just thought it was interesting, like, oh wow, like I never really knew these things. But
It's another one of those difficult things. I think that sometimes you can't be 100% sure. Like with even learning disorders, you can't tell if it's a developmental thing or if it's a temporary thing or what's going on. And with emotional abuse, especially if you're not with the child very often, it can be very hard to pick up on whether it's a consistent thing or it just happened that one time. And I think, Alyssa, what you were saying about neglect with the journal, that can be helpful if we're worried about kids with emotional abuse as well. If they have a pattern of speaking about themselves in a negative way or different things like that, that would be something we can notice and we can keep track of in order to help them and to know if they need intervention of some kind.
Yeah.
I can go next if you want on my stuff for this week.
Go for it.
Okay. I chose bullying because it's something that my daughter dealt with in preschool. I didn't realize that mean girls existed that little, but they do. And I was completely unprepared for it. My daughter was unprepared for it, and she didn't know really. She didn't even have a word for it. And so it took a long time for us to figure out what was going on, but it completely changed my little girl. And so that's something that I've really been passionate about and learning about and trying to teach my children how to handle the situation. So that's why I chose bullying. I found a lot of different peer-reviewed articles. It talked about, the first article talked about the associations between lower socioeconomic families and the rates of bullying. People in lower income homes tend to victimize others more, and parental education is also directly linked to that, specifically the mothers. If the mother has lower levels of intelligence and schooling and those things, her children are more likely to victimize others. Most people that do victimize other children are also victims themselves. Roughly 13% of people, let's see, what was it? Roughly 1/3 of 5 to 6-year-olds have been involved as bullies, 17% exclusively as bullies, 13% were both, and less than 4 were victims only. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But what I thought was even more interesting is there was another article I found that talks about how bullying increases through the school years and then tends to lessen a little bit in middle school and junior high, but it's still a big problem. And so the best intervention is education, and it has to come through the school. It says that 86% of children between the ages of 12 and 15 are bullied at school before it starts to die off after age 15. And it said that, let's see, bullying is more prevalent than smoking, alcohol, drugs, or sex among that age group. And cyberbullying is a major issue, and they talked about ways you can detect cyberbullying and identify who the person is and things like that. They said generally someone who is bullying you online uses the same terms and sentences and things like that they would in real life, and so those are some of the things that they use, and those things should be taken to the school. Everything should be printed off. If it's on a text message, it should be sent to an adult's phone, and those should be taken to the school, and the school needs to be involved in those kind of things. They said generally people who are bullies like to dominate others, and they try to use other people to get what they want. They can't see a situation from someone else's perspective. They're only concerned with their own wants and their pleasures. They hurt other kids when parents or other adults are not around. They view weaker siblings or peers as prey. They use blame, criticism, and false allegation to protect their inadequacies. They refuse to accept responsibility, and they lack foresight. They can't see what the consequences are going to be, and they crave attention. Um, and those are some of the things to look for if you're a teacher or something like that, so you can kind of identify what's going on. It can be really difficult to see bullying, even if you're around the kids all day long, and so those are some ways to try and identify it. Bullying has been defined as there has to be an intent to do harm, it has to be long lasting, and there has to be that power struggle. Um, there's also the threat of further aggression. It's not something that can just be pushed away, said, oh, it was a one-time thing, it was an accident. So those things are all important. Some of the most effective intervention has started with doing a survey where they've taken surveys of the students in different schools and asked how they feel about different things regarding safety in their school. Let's see. Some of the questions were really good, and they have different things they can choose from. So they ask, who do you feel like you can talk to if you're bullied? And then it has a list of counselors, family, friends, coaches. What can you do to stop bullying? Different things like that. Generally, they said the most common intervention practice is that people are supposed to just ignore it, and it'll stop, it'll go away, but that does not work. The most effective intervention for bullying is to encourage bystanders to take a stand. Most of the time, people won't stand up. I think, let's see, what did they say it was? I can't remember the exact statistic, but it was really high. Okay, so right here. 85% of the time, people would support the bully by either encouraging them when they see something or laughing when they see them victimizing someone. 80% of the time, they would actively participate in the bullying, and only 13% of the time did a bystander intervene or help the target. When a bystander intervenes, particularly another child, that's what's most effective because it takes power away from the bully in the eyes of their peers. So that's what they encourage as the best intervention, is to teach children how to step in and encourage them to do so.
Those numbers are like crazy. When I was when I was volunteering in a first grade classroom, it's kind of interesting because you don't really think of like they are in that mindset to like bully other people, but they kind of are, because when I was volunteering, we would see, it wasn't like consistent bullying, but like there'd be like little remarks to like the same person, and you're kind of like, oh, that's interesting, and I wonder what's going on there, and you never really think of more than that, if that makes sense. But like, it's true, like it can happen, and it's crazy how many people don't step in to try to help, so.
Mm-hmm. That's definitely true. And I think what's worse is I feel like the amount of bullying has gone up in recent years. I don't know if that's proven or if there's a statistic on that, but I just feel like there's more of it than I remember, especially with the access that we have to each other on the internet, that cyberbullying has become such a big deal because it puts a lot of kids who, may not have the capacity to contain themselves right in direct contact with people on a regular basis that maybe they wouldn't always have that kind of access to, and so they start to learn things about these kids that they use against them to make fun of them, and it just gets worse. So I think we definitely have to be better about teaching our kids to intervene and to do those things.
Well, and we need to teach all of our kids. My mom's cousin has a daughter who is 13, and she intervened. She stood up for a girl that was being bullied at school. And in retaliation, the girls that had been bullying this other one started a We Hate Shelby Facebook page. Yeah, and then they started doing the same thing to her and victimizing this girl. And they went to the principal and said, oh, Shelby's bullying us. luckily Shelby's mom was able to come and say, no, this is what's going on. Here's the evidence all over Facebook. Here are the text messages they sent her and things like that. But when they started victimizing Shelby, nobody else would stand up and do anything about it. Because I don't know if they were scared of retaliation or what, but this little girl had stood up for someone who needed help, and then everybody else kind of backed away, and it got to the point where she was walking home from school, and one of the girls attacked her and hit her from behind, and she ended up in the hospital. And these are 12-year-olds. It's absolutely appalling how fast it can get out of hand.
That's insane.
Just goes to show we've got so much work to do.
We really do.
All right. So I'll try and quickly go over mine because we're supposed to do a few other things before we wrap this up, and I don't want this to go too late because I know that we all have things to do tomorrow because it is a Wednesday. So just briefly, I did research on depression, and I mean, there are still kind of shocking numbers that go along with these kinds of things. One study that I found, it was in Australia, but I'm going to assume that this can also apply to America as well, found that 3.7% of boys and 2.1% of girls aged 6 to 12 experienced a depressive episode in the previous 12 months. And the average duration was 9 months, with a 70% probability of relapse within 5 years. And the greatest problem with these numbers is that if they experienced these depressive episodes, they were much more likely in adult situations to also experience depressive episodes. And so while it is a combination of genetic vulnerability and early developmental experiences and exposures to stress, it's just so crazy to me that rate is so much higher than we think. And so the interventions that were mainly suggested, of course, some were saying if it's severe enough or if the parents or the doctors feel that they need it, to go ahead and put your kid on an antidepressant. But they put sort of qualifications on it. They were like, it needs to be affecting their lives. It needs to be altering the way that they function. Like, if it's that they're having suicidal thoughts, like it needs to be regular. It can't just be a one-time thing. If it's like problems with eating or sleeping or whatever, it needs to be a regular thing that's interfering with their growth and development before they will put kids on antidepressants. But sort of the alternative is something that, I mean, I've heard of it, so I'm hoping that you all have heard of it before. It's called cognitive behavioral therapy. And so it's a type of therapy that you do with a counselor or a therapist of some kind, with a limited number of sessions, and it's identifying and then trying to change inaccurate or negative thinking. So if a child, per se, is perceiving a situation in such a way that they feel that they're in control of it, or that it's their fault and that it's stressing them out and depressing them, like, say, in a bullying situation, let's put it in that perspective. If, say, a child is being bullied and they've become depressed, they may start to feel that they deserve the bullying, or that the bullying is their fault in some way, shape, or form because of a fault of their own, like maybe they're not good at reading and so people make fun of them, or it's whatever. It could even be nothing, that they've just made up some unusual circumstance in their head and they've altered their way of thinking. The cognitive behavioral therapist goes in with the child and is going to sit down and talk them through like why they think that way, how they think that way, how they can change that thought process, and they're going to practice it over and over again until they believe that the child can sort of do it on their own. And this is the one that they say is the most effective. They say that it can even be more effective than antidepressants, but that frequently, if it's severe enough, they do it in conjunction with antidepressants. But that ultimately it's very important for people to just pay attention to, like, the symptoms, because if you don't recognize it, then you can't do anything about it.
Yeah.
Well,
I didn't know that it started so early. I mean, you know, they said they were 6 years old and it started 6 months before that. That's a scary thought.
because you don't see your children as these depressed, little humans. You see them as your children are supposed to have fun and explore and be curious and develop all of their senses. And that's just kind of a scary thought. 6 years old, it's just a lot to watch for.
Mm-hmm. It's true. I think it is important, though, to note that it does talk about that there are sort of like multiple combinations that lead to depression. So a lot of it is probably going to go with genetic vulnerability and then the exposure to stress. But it also talks about like things that could even just be almost like distractions, like some of the symptoms that we may perceive as depression sometimes could be part of a physical illness like a viral infection or fatigue syndrome. So it's just very careful and important to know like how your child is personally and how to read them so that you can actually tell if it's a depressive episode or if there's like an illness that it's stemming from that you need to treat instead. But that's where cognitive behavioral therapy will be really good because you don't have to put the kid on an antidepressant. It's like you help them with their thought process instead.
When we were studying cognitive behavioral therapy in another class, they said that it is more effective both in the long term and in the short term than antidepressants anyway. It works faster and it's obviously more cost effective. I think that it is so cool. I really like the cognitive behavior therapy.
Mm-hmm. All right. So the next sort of thing that we want to talk about, and we're only supposed to spend like 3 to 4 minutes each on this, but I'm gonna like if you don't need that much, go for it. Just talk about some highlights from your interviews that you conducted with caregivers. So if anyone has any outstanding experiences or things that they learned from their interviews.
I think what stood out to me the most is I interviewed a couple of different people, and every single one of them, their main concern was the same, and it was exposure to pornography. Even at one of them just happened to be in the same room while I was talking to a mom with the age group I did choose, that she had kids in the younger age group, and even with her 3-year-old, that's something that she's worried about. And rightly so. I mean, the numbers are terrifying, but that really struck me that's something we have to be so concerned about because it really does. It can change the way their brain functions. It can change everything, and they're exposed to it at such a young age, and it's so difficult to keep them from it. So I think that's what really stuck with me the most from all of the things that we talked about in the interviews was that concern that all of these parents had. And a lot of them just don't know what to do or how to talk to their kids about it or how to explain to their kids what it is or what to watch for, how to keep themselves safe, what's healthy and what isn't. That really got me thinking because I've got a little girl who she's 6. My son is almost 4, but my 6-year-old goes and plays with friends, and even though I trust the parents, you can't always control what goes on at somebody else's house, and I don't know if an older sibling might show them something or things like that, and that's a big concern. It's not something that I had worried about as much before talking to these mothers, and that really showed me how important it is to watch out for something like that.
That was a main concern in my interviews as well, and that I had a roommate last semester who really emphasized pornography. And when you're dating someone or you're gonna marry someone, talk about it and bring it up. Has it been a problem? Is it a problem? So it really got me thinking about it, and in children's lives. One of the moms that I had talked to, she told me that one of her daughters, they checked their phones every night, and she found that she was on a pornography site, and that's scary because I remember a couple years back one of my friends was saying that when they do the priestess sessions for conference, it's all about pornography and pornography and pornography. And he's like, and when you guys have the women's session, you guys just talk about how wonderful women are, you know? It's like, well, that's because back then I don't think it was such an issue for women, but I read something not too long, it's just a couple weeks ago, that it said the rate at which women are looking into pornography is rising so quickly, it's catching up to the rate that men and boys do it. And that's really scary to me. But that's also what stood out to me, and also how I guess just how involved the parents were in a child's lives. You know, I'm kind of getting ready to have kids soon, so it's like, wow, you know, it's a lot that you have to start watching for. So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, along with that, in my interviews, it wasn't like it was brought up, but then one thing that a lot of them talked about was how concerned they are about how things are changing. Like when they were talking about when they were little, there wasn't a lot of things to like now kids are acting out because of things they're seeing, like certain movies, they're picking up on things, and like they're like, well, back then we really didn't have, like, we would just go out and play with friends, and we all had this, and now like, you can turn on anything on the TV, or you can go watch a movie, or you can get on the internet and look up pornography, and they're like, we're kind of just concerned on that we're making sure that we're doing a good job so that we're leading them into the right direction and not having them do all these different things because like it said, like everything is changing, constantly changing, and like the more and more we see, like you can walk in the mall and you can see like I know like just like Victoria's Secret, and like, they're just wearing like a bra, and you're like, well, and you don't know exactly what they're thinking or what they're like, you know, so they're like, we're just concerned of them growing up and not doing the right thing, and we're not teaching them the right thing, so that was what was brought up a lot.
So I'm going to end it on a positive note. My interviews did not include that at all. It's possible that part of it was that I talked with some people that used to be Cub Scout, like, leaders, but it was a few years ago, back when maybe pornography wasn't as big of an issue. But something that they talked about a lot that I really appreciated was the way that they described the strengths of the kids. Like, at one point, one of them described a strength of the kids as being like the fact that they have short attention spans, because they were like, oh yeah, well, we could run multiple activities at once. Like, we could have them do 15 minutes of one over here that needed time to dry and switch them over to something else and then switch them back, and they didn't even notice. And so it made it much easier for them to transition back and forth and to get lots of things done and for the kids to learn lots of things. And obviously, as someone that, like, so I work in a preschool sometimes, and sometimes short attention spans are not the easiest thing to deal with. And it's especially frustrating when you're trying to get them to do something specific. And so, you know, when you start thinking about these things that normally we're like, oh, well, let's make them stop doing that, blah, 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 and seeing it as a strength instead was really cool. But something else that really stood out to me was that regardless of what we were talking about, they said it always started with the parents. Like, we know from the proclamation of the family, obviously, that the parents are, like, super important in raising a kid. But I didn't, like, the people I interviewed are not members, and so it was really interesting to me to see how, like, just from life experience, they've seen the same thing, that it really does start with the parents and with how the parents treat the kids and help them to learn things and to feel comfortable with certain things and to not feel comfortable about other things. So I think it puts a lot of pressure on us, but I think at the same time we receive a lot of blessings because we need so much help to do these things.
I love that you talked about turning those little things that can be irritations into strengths. That's something I really, I hadn't thought about the short attention spans, but my daughter is incredibly stubborn, and it is really frustrating sometimes if I'm trying to get her to do her homework or clean up her toys or something like that. If she doesn't want to do it, she is not going to do it. And I was talking to my friend's dad one day, and he said, He brought it up. She's like, that is the most stubborn little girl I've ever seen. Like, oh yes, she is. And he said, what a blessing. I'm like, what do you mean, what a blessing? I can't get her to do anything. He said, yeah, but nobody else will be able to either. What she learns and what she believes in, she will stand up for. She's not going to have problems giving in to peer pressure. She's not going to struggle with that at all. She's not going to care. She's going to do what she feels is right. I'm like, I hadn't thought of it that way before, and it completely changed my perspective. So instead of trying to I guess, like, that help that die down, I want to encourage that, but I want to try and help her to just develop the right kind of ideas and the right belief system so that when she uses that stubbornness, it's in ways that will keep her safe.
See, there's a good and a bad side to everything.
There really is. I think it's definitely a gift to be able to see those things, like the people you talked about, to be able to see those strengths and the frustrations. I think that's a gift. I don't think that comes naturally for many people.
Well, they're also a little bit older. I'll just put that out there. They've had a little bit more life experience than I have. All right. Were there any other things that we wanted to talk about as far as things that stood out from the interviews?
I don't think so.
No? Okay. So the next thing that it wanted us to talk about was, now that we've shared all of this information, if I can still talk, is to identify some common elements of effective interventions, regardless of the different problems and the different domains. Like, is there anything that we notice that sort of goes across all of the interventions?
I think we all talked about parents and how they have to be involved. They have to not only be with the child, but really, really be there and know what's going on an emotional level, on a physical level, on a cognitive level, so we can be able to watch for different signs of, abuse, neglect, depression, all of that stuff. That's something I saw. So just being good parents and maybe encouraging other parents to watch out for the same signs.
I think education is another thing. You have to be educated on the signs, and I mean, the family-centered intervention is the best option as far as neglect. So teaching them and giving them information and resources as to how to be better parents, and with the bullying, teaching the children how to stand up for others and to be accepting of others, and with depression, understanding what are actual signs of it. People have to be educated in order to be able to do anything.
Yeah, I think another thing that is that one way or another, like, you're getting help from someone is what we talked about, like getting help from a teacher who's bullying, or getting neglect, going to CPS, or getting like a parent involved. Just getting involved, I think, is what the general thing was. Because if you're not involved, then you're not really going to know what's going around. Like with depression, you have to know the signs, you have to know everything. So I think just getting help and getting involved was a big thing.
Mm-hmm. And I think just recognizing that it can happen is a big deal. I think for a lot of these issues, like bullying or neglect or emotional abuse or depression, it's very easy for all of us to just sort of sweep it under the rug and be like, oh, it's temporary, oh, it's nothing, oh, whatever, like, that's just them being them. Like, it's very important, I think, from what we've talked about, to really be invested in the child and to understand them on a personal level, to make sure that we're paying attention to them, and that it's not just an ignoring the problem. We've got to be there for them.
I agree.
All right. So the last thing it really wants us to talk about is to share the best general insight or suggestion about effectively intervening to foster optimum development. feel like that's kind of the same question.
Yeah, I think it's like intervening is just like what we just said, like know that it happens, get involved, and then do something, so.
Yeah.
Okay, so the last one is there anything, it wants to know if there are highlights. So is there anything specific that any of you have learned from this conversation that you want to go out and do or that you want to remember from now on?
I think that for me, I like what you said, is that knowing that it actually happens, because it's kind of hard to think you have little children going through these type of things, and with me, like, wanting to have children in the future, it's like, this could happen to my own children. I just need to know that, these things can happen. I need to be aware of what to do, and even if it's not my own child, someone else's child, and I see it, like, just knowing that it's going to happen, or that it can happen, and if it does, like, what to do from there.
Another thing that really hit me is that the point you made, it always starts with the parents. We've talked about that in all of our little discussion boards where, it's the parents' main responsibility. It really is, and it's not just when it comes to intervention, but prevention. And I think that that's really key, is trying to be the kind of parents that can prevent issues as often as possible. And there are times when it can't be prevented, but just really being there and trying to do everything you can to make sure that these kind of things, like too much stress for your 5-year-old that could lead to depression, trying to make sure that those things don't happen in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Melissa, do you have any other insights for us?
What stood out to me from what all three of you talked about was kind of like what Caitlin had said, how early this all happens. Especially with yours, Maze. I mean, that's scary to me, depression so early on. So as a teacher, or as a future teacher, I guess, I just want to be able to watch out for all the things that we talked about, and different signs of it, and what I can do as an educator to be able to help my children and my students.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to say, so obviously I've noticed, because I can see all your hands, you guys haven't seen my hands during this, but I'm the most single of all of us. I'm not dating, I don't have a ring on my hand, anything like that. And I just want to say that the highlight for me of all of this has been how impressed I am at how dedicated all of you three are to being like such good parents and such good role models, and like helping your kids to overcome these obstacles and to avoid them if possible, because we've talked about how important parents are, and you're so dedicated to definitely trying those things and to definitely being those people. And so however worried you are about those things happening, I can tell you that I have belief and I have faith in you guys. So I think that it's all going to be okay.
Thank you. That's so sweet.
Thank you.
It's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. All right. Well, if that's everything, we've managed to finish not too far off time. So I'm guessing, Marty, when you log off, that you'll be able to post this somehow for
Yes.
the class.
Yep, I will do that as soon as we're finished. Thank you for reminding me. I forgot that I'm the one that had started the recording.
Yeah, perfect. Awesome. Okay, so everybody don't forget to do the paragraph.